call came in just after sunrise. A fisherman had noticed something strange along a remote stretch of land near Eagle Mountain Lake. A foul odor, heavy and unmistakable in the August heat. Deputies arrived not knowing what they were walking into. One officer later recalled that the smell hit them before they even saw the body. "You don't forget that smell," he said. "Decomposition in the Texas heat. It clings to your clothes, your skin, your memory." As they approached the blanket, flies scattered. What lay beneath was not just a corpse. It was a warning. The man was bound in such a way that investigators immediately suspected gang involvement. His wrists and ankles were tied, forcing him into a hogtied position. Around his neck, deep lacerations suggested he had been strangled, or at least restrained with extreme force. Sheriff's deputies had seen killings before, but this one was different. The level of cruelty suggested that the victim had been singled out for torture, not just murder. Someone wanted him to suffer. Someone wanted to send a message. Detectives whispered among themselves, "This looks like gang work." When they uncovered the man's identity, Ernest Ray Lackey, age 34, more questions emerged. He wasn't a major drug dealer. He wasn't a known shot caller in prison. On the surface, he was just another North Texas man drifting between odd jobs, acquaintances, and parties. So why would anyone go to such extreme lengths to erase him? That question would lead investigators into the shadowy world of the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, a prison gang notorious for violence that went far beyond the walls of the penitentiary. A world where a rumor, a lie, or a single mistake could mark you for death. For Ernest Lackey, that mistake would cost him everything. Before the headlines, before the trial, before his name was tied forever to one of the most brutal killings in Tarrant County history. There was just Ernest. Ernest Ray Lackey was 34 years old. He lived in Burleson, a small Texas town just south of Fort Worth. Those who knew him described him as quiet, often keeping to himself, but also easily led. A man searching for belonging in a world that can be unforgiving to those on the margins. He wasn't a hardened criminal. He wasn't a shot caller or a gang leader. But in Texas, where prison gangs wield influence far beyond prison walls, even small associations can prove deadly. Like many men caught in the web of gang violence, Ernest's life had cracks. He floated between jobs, sometimes staying with friends, sometimes moving into mobile homes around Tarrant County. There were whispers of minor drug use, run-ins with the law, nothing that made him infamous, but enough to put him in circles where the wrong company could become dangerous company. And for Ernest, that wrong company came in the form of acquaintances linked to the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. In gang culture, reputation is everything. Respect is currency. And a lie, even a small one, can be deadly. Investigators believe that Ernest may have claimed an affiliation with the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. Whether he said it in passing, to impress others, or to protect himself, no one can say for sure. But in the Brotherhood's world, there is no room for pretending. To falsely claim membership in the ABT was, in their eyes, a crime worse than betrayal. It was seen as a personal insult to men who had bled, killed, and suffered behind bars for the gang. And so, what might have seemed like a careless boast, a way to gain respect in a rough crowd, turned into a death sentence. In the summer of 2012, Ernest was hanging around a mobile home outside Azle, Texas. It was here, among people he thought were friends, that the whispers of his supposed lie reached the wrong ears. Among those present was Staten Monster Corbett Jr., a known enforcer for the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. To Ernest, Corbett may have seemed larger than life. Tattooed, feared, respected in circles Ernest could only hope to belong to. But to Corbett, and to the Brotherhood he represented, Ernest was nothing more than an imposter. And for imposters, there could be no mercy. What happened next would strip Ernest of his humanity in a way few victims ever endure. He was tied up, beaten, and tortured in ways that would horrify even veteran investigators. The Aryan Brotherhood of Texas wanted to make an example of him, and they did. But to truly grasp the brutality of what Ernest faced, we need to understand the gang itself, its bloody history, its strict codes, and its reputation as one of the most feared criminal organizations in Texas. That story begins behind prison walls. When detectives first saw the hogtied body of Ernest Ray Lackey, they didn't need long to suspect the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. The method of killing, the brutality, the sense of a message. It all carried the hallmarks of a gang whose name strikes fear both inside and outside prison walls. The Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, known simply as the ABT, is not just another prison gang. It is a paramilitary-style organization, deeply rooted in white supremacist ideology and notorious for enforcing loyalty with blood. To be part of the ABT is to live under constant scrutiny. To betray it, or even to be perceived as disrespecting it, is to invite death. The ABT was born in the 1980s inside the Texas prison system. Its founders took inspiration from the older Aryan Brotherhood that had emerged in California prisons during the 1960s. But while the California faction was largely focused on prison dominance, the Texas branch quickly grew into its own independent, violent entity. In Texas prisons, survival often meant aligning with a group. Blacks joined groups like the Mandingo Warriors. Hispanics joined La Im, the Mexican Mafia, or the Texas Syndicate. White inmates needed their own protection. Out of this need, the ABT was born. But protection came with a price: absolute obedience. The ABT operates with military precision. Its leadership is known as the Steering Committee, composed of senior generals who direct orders from behind bars. Beneath them are captains, lieutenants, and soldiers. Every member is expected to follow orders without hesitation, and the rules are clear. Betrayal is punishable by death. Cooperation with law enforcement is punishable by death. Even a careless word, a false claim of membership, is seen as enough to justify a killing. This is not a loose street crew. It is an organization built on fear, discipline, and violence. On the surface, the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas cloaks itself in white supremacist rhetoric. Their symbols are filled with swastikas, lightning bolts, and runic emblems. But make no mistake, this is less about ideology and more about power. The ABT thrives on the drug trade, extortion, loan sharking, and contract killings. White supremacy provides the cause, but money and fear are the real lifeblood of the gang. And it enforces its dominance with medieval cruelty. Members and rivals alike have been burned, stabbed, mutilated, and dismembered. Not just to kill them, but to send a warning to others. Perhaps the most terrifying part of the ABT is not its ideology, but its psychology. Members are indoctrinated into a culture where violence is not only acceptable, it is expected. Killing for the Brotherhood is not a crime, it is a rite of passage. Those who step out of line are green-lighted, marked for death. And once the order is given, the rest of the gang knows what to do. This culture of fear doesn't stop at the prison gates. In fact, some of the ABT's most savage killings have happened on the streets, as was the case with Ernest Lackey. By the summer of 2012, Staten Monster Corbett Jr. was a soldier for this gang. He lived by its code, and he enforced it without mercy. When word reached Corbett that Ernest Lackey had falsely claimed to be a member of the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, the decision was swift. In the eyes of the Brotherhood, that was an insult too great to ignore. Ernest would have to be punished, and in the ABT, punishment often means torture. It began like so many gatherings in the underworld of rural Texas, a mobile home, late-night drinking, drug use, and people drifting in and out. Ernest Lackey thought he was among friends, but that night his fate was already sealed. Word had spread through the circle. Ernest had been telling people he was connected to the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. To some, it may have seemed like harmless talk, but to Staten Monster Corbett Jr., a soldier of the ABT, it was an unforgivable insult. And so, as Ernest lingered inside the mobile home, the atmosphere shifted. What started as a social gathering soon turned into a death chamber. Witnesses later described how Ernest was grabbed, beaten, and forced to the ground. His wrists and ankles were bound together, hogtied, leaving him completely helpless. The image itself, investigators said, was chilling. A grown man reduced to prey, trussed up like livestock awaiting slaughter. But this wasn't simply a murder. This was punishment. And punishment, in the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, was meant to be slow. Corbett and others struck him repeatedly. Fists, boots, blunt objects, each blow landing with the weight of both anger and ritual. Investigators would later discover that Ernest's ribs had been shattered, his spine severely injured. The autopsy painted a picture of sustained, calculated violence, not the quick frenzy of a fight, but the drawn-out brutality of men intent on making him suffer. Among the most horrifying details was the soldering iron. Testimony revealed that it was heated, pressed against Ernest's body in acts of sexual torture. It wasn't enough to beat him. Corbett wanted to degrade him, humiliate him, and burn into his flesh the consequences of crossing the ABT. For detectives, even hardened veterans of homicide, this was the moment that set the case apart. One officer said later, "This wasn't just a killing. This was an execution designed to terrify anyone who thought about lying to the Brotherhood." Inside that mobile home, silence hung between the screams. Those present knew the rules. To intervene would have been suicide. To speak up later would invite retaliation. For the ABT, fear is as powerful as violence itself. So the torture went on, blow after blow, burn after burn. Until at last, Ernest's body could take no more. When the torture ended, Ernest was lifeless. But even in death, the cruelty continued. His body was wrapped in a blanket, bound tightly with ropes, and stuffed into a vehicle. Corbett and others drove him to the edge of Eagle Mountain Lake, a quiet wooded area where they believed his body would never be found. There, in the Texas heat, they dumped him like trash. A man once desperate for belonging, discarded as if he had never mattered at all. But Ernest was found. And when investigators uncovered the true extent of his torture, they knew they were dealing with more than just a murder. They were staring directly into the brutal enforcement arm of the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. And bringing his killers to justice would not be easy. When the decomposed remains of Ernest Ray Lackey were pulled from the blanket near Eagle Mountain Lake, detectives knew they had a brutal homicide on their hands. But what they didn't yet know was why. The Tarrant County Sheriff's Office launched a full-scale investigation. Detectives began retracing Ernest's last known steps, the people he had been seen with, the places he had stayed, and the reputation he carried in the community. Very quickly, one name surfaced repeatedly: Staten Monster Corbett Jr. Even though Ernest's body was badly decomposed, the medical examiner found enough evidence to piece together a chilling story. Broken ribs and spinal injuries suggested prolonged beatings. Ligature marks on his wrists and ankles revealed he had been hogtied, and burns and sexual injuries indicated the use of a soldering iron. This wasn't random violence. This was systematic torture. One detective put it bluntly, "It was one of the most sadistic cases I've ever worked. Whoever did this wanted to make him suffer." The key to cracking the case wasn't just in the forensics. It was in the people who had been inside that mobile home. But convincing witnesses to talk about the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas was easier said than done. The ABT ruled by fear. Snitching meant a death sentence. Even civilians who weren't gang members knew that crossing them could be fatal. Many refused to speak at all. But slowly, under the weight of police questioning, cracks began to form. A few witnesses admitted they had seen Corbett, and others bind Ernest. They described the hog-tying, the beatings, and even the soldering iron. One witness recalled how Ernest screamed, begging for his life. For investigators, these testimonies confirmed what they already suspected. This was an ABT killing. Staten Monster Corbett Jr. was not an unknown figure to law enforcement. He was a known soldier of the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, a man with a reputation for violence and intimidation. His nickname, Monster, had been earned the hard way. Detectives built their case carefully, knowing the Brotherhood would try to protect him. They gathered witness statements, tied Corbett to the mobile home, and traced his movements around the time of the killing. The more they dug, the clearer the picture became. Corbett had led the torture, and Corbett had ordered the disposal of Ernest's body. Prosecutors faced a daunting task. They weren't just taking on one man. They were taking on a gang that had intimidated Texas communities for decades. Witness protection became a priority. Evidence had to be airtight. But piece by piece, the puzzle came together. Witnesses identified Corbett as the ringleader. Forensics confirmed Ernest's torture, matched the accounts, and the timeline of Corbett's actions placed him squarely at the center of the crime. By the time the case was presented to a grand jury, the story was clear. Staten Monster Corbett Jr. had tortured and killed Ernest Ray Lackey on behalf of the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. The stage was now set for a dramatic courtroom showdown. A jury would soon be asked to decide whether Corbett was guilty of one of the most sadistic murders in recent Texas history. But when the trial began, the outcome would be decided with shocking speed. The Tarrant County Courthouse in Fort Worth has seen its share of murder trials, but few carried the same air of dread as the case of Staten Monster Corbett Jr. Inside the courtroom, extra security was stationed at every door. Everyone knew the name Corbett, a soldier of the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. The fear wasn't just about him, but about the invisible reach of the gang he represented. Witnesses had been threatened. Prosecutors knew jurors might hesitate, intimidated by the shadow of the Brotherhood. But as the trial began, it became clear that the evidence against Corbett was overwhelming. Prosecutors laid out the facts with surgical precision. They described Ernest Ray Lackey's final hours in excruciating detail, hogtied inside a mobile home, beaten until his ribs and spine fractured, burned and sexually tortured with a soldering iron, dumped near Eagle Mountain Lake, bound and wrapped in a blanket. They called witnesses who described what they had seen that night, Ernest's screams, Corbett's rage, the sheer horror of the torture. And then came the forensic experts, who confirmed that every injury aligned with the witness testimony. The picture was undeniable. Ernest hadn't just been killed, he had been made an example. Corbett's defense tried to cast doubt, suggesting that others in the house were responsible or that Corbett's role was exaggerated. But the witnesses were consistent. The forensics matched. And Corbett's reputation, his very nickname, Monster, betrayed him. Even in a courtroom, he carried himself with the coldness of a man who had nothing to fear. But the jury wasn't buying it. After closing arguments, the jury retired to deliberate. Prosecutors braced themselves for a long wait. In gang-related trials, juries often wrestle with fear, wondering if convicting a gang soldier might put them in danger. But in this case, deliberation took just 37 minutes. When the jury returned, the words came swift and heavy. Guilty of murder. Judge Scott Wish handed down the punishment. 60 years in prison for murder, plus 20 years for tampering with a corpse. The sentences would run concurrently. Corbett showed little emotion as the words echoed through the courtroom. For Ernest Lackey's family, there was no sense of triumph. The damage had already been done. Their loved one was gone, brutally taken in ways no family should ever have to imagine. But there was relief. Relief that the man responsible would spend most of his life behind bars. For law enforcement, the conviction carried another meaning. It was proof that even the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas could not shield its members from justice. It sent a message to the gang's soldiers. Torture and murder would not go unpunished. Still, detectives knew that Corbett's sentence would not cripple the ABT. The gang was bigger than one man, and as long as the Brotherhood thrived, there would be more victims. With Corbett locked away, the case of Ernest Lackey closed in the courtroom. But the questions it raised about gang violence, extremism, and the cost of false allegiance still lingered. And to understand the true weight of this killing, one has to look beyond a single man's conviction to the broader implications of the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas and its reign of terror across the state. The conviction of Staten Monster Corbett Jr. closed the chapter on Ernest Lackey's murder, but the story did not end there. Because this wasn't just about one man killing another. It was about an organization, a violent, secretive army that has haunted Texas for decades. The Aryan Brotherhood of Texas is more than a gang. It is a culture of violence, a network of criminals bound together by blood oaths and fear. And Ernest's torture was a window into how far they are willing to go to protect their name. By 2012, law enforcement estimated that the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas had more than 2,500 members spread across both prisons and communities throughout the state. Their influence wasn't limited to the penitentiary system. They had spilled into suburbs, small towns, and rural areas where methamphetamine trafficking and organized crime flourished. They weren't alone. Rival gangs like the Mexican Mafia, the Texas Syndicate, and the Barrio Azteca competed for control of Texas's criminal underworld. But the ABT stood apart for one reason: their willingness to use extreme violence against their own. For many gangs, killing an outsider sends a message. For the ABT, killing one of their own, or even someone who falsely claimed to be one of their own, sends an even stronger one. The story of Ernest Lackey is, at its core, a story about fear. He may have boasted, or been mistaken, or been misunderstood. But in the eyes of the Brotherhood, that was enough. By torturing him in the way they did, they sent a ripple of terror through everyone who heard the story. Imagine being an associate on the fringes of the ABT, hearing how Ernest was hogtied, beaten, burned, and dumped like garbage. Imagine the message that sends: step out of line, and this will be you. Fear is the ABT's greatest weapon, more powerful than their knives, more enduring than their tattoos. It keeps witnesses silent, families in hiding, and communities too scared to resist. For years, state and federal authorities have waged a quiet war against the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. In 2012, the same year Ernest was killed, federal prosecutors indicted dozens of ABT members in a sweeping racketeering case. The charges included murder, kidnapping, drug trafficking, and conspiracy. The government called it one of the largest organized crime crackdowns in Texas history. But even then, officials admitted that dismantling the ABT entirely would be nearly impossible. Its decentralized structure, its prison routes, and its culture of violence make it resilient. Every time a soldier like Corbett is sent away, another rises to take his place. And yet the killing of Ernest Lackey stands out as symbolic. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about drugs. It wasn't even about racial warfare. It was about identity, about who gets to claim the mantle of the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. To the ABT, Ernest was an outsider trying to wear their colors, and for that, he was destroyed. His murder was a ritual sacrifice to the gang's code, a brutal reminder that their name cannot be borrowed, faked, or disrespected. In Tarrant County, the story sent shockwaves. Local residents saw firsthand what many already whispered about. The gangs weren't just locked behind prison bars. They were here, in mobile homes, in neighborhoods, on quiet Texas roads. Parents warned their children. Small-time hustlers thought twice before claiming affiliations they didn't have. And law enforcement doubled down, knowing the ABT's terror could spread like wildfire if left unchecked. But for Ernest's family, none of this could undo the loss. For them, the gang politics, the history, the symbolism, it all fades behind a single truth. A brother, a son, a man tortured to death because he wanted to belong. And in the final act of this story, we return to Eagle Mountain Lake, where his body was found, and reflect on the haunting legacy of a murder that was meant to terrify, and still does to this day. The sun sets over Eagle Mountain Lake. The same trees sway in the August heat as they did the day Ernest Lackey's body was found. The water shimmers quietly, indifferent to the violence that once touched its shores. For anyone who knows the story, it is impossible to look at this place and not feel the weight of it. The terror, the brutality, the silence of a life snuffed out in a small Texas mobile home. Ernest Ray Lackey was not a criminal mastermind. He was a man searching for belonging, caught in the orbit of a gang that measures loyalty in pain and death. He became a victim not because of what he had done, but because of what he was perceived to have done. Hogtied, beaten, burned, discarded. His life was ended in a ritual of cruelty designed to inspire fear. And it worked. For years, the story of his death has served as a warning to those who might consider crossing the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. The Aryan Brotherhood of Texas continues to operate, in prisons and on the streets. Their symbols are inked onto skin, their codes whispered in hallways and back rooms, and their influence stretches across communities throughout the state. For law enforcement, Ernest's murder was both a tragedy and a confirmation. This gang's reach is vast, and its methods are merciless. For the ABT, the story is a demonstration of their power. For the public, it is a reminder. Even seemingly small lies, even casual claims, can carry deadly consequences in a world ruled by fear and violence. In the end, the body wrapped in a blanket near Eagle Mountain Lake tells a story louder than words. It is the story of a man who wanted to belong, a man who misstepped, and the deadly price exacted by a gang whose reputation is built on terror. It is a story that will echo long after the courtroom verdicts, long after the perpetrators are behind bars. Because in North Texas and beyond, The shadow of the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas is long, and its methods are brutal. Standing on the banks of Eagle Mountain Lake, one cannot help but feel the weight of what occurred here. A life was destroyed, a family shattered, and a community reminded of the stark reality of organized gang violence. Ernest Lackey's death is a cautionary tale, a chilling reflection on the consequences of pride, fear, and misplaced trust. And as long as the ABT continues to operate, it serves as a reminder that in Texas, some codes are enforced in blood, and some mistakes are simply unforgivable. The lake remains calm. The sun sets. But the echoes of that brutal night linger, haunting, unforgettable, and eternal.